All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So today we'll be covering one of the biggest, most important topics submitted cases in support. My name is Alex Fuentez. I've been in the support department for about 4 years, and I will be presenting to you help my data is missing. So some of the most common causes of missing data is due to communication loss, or what we call loss of polling. Some of the common causes of this is due to power failure, sometimes due to lightning strikes, network issues, IT up in the security to the latest and greatest, or hardware failures. We'll also be running through a little bit of process null failures. Those are major suspects into why your downstream parameters are sometimes missing. So if you're here, you more than likely come across the problem of going into the office first thing in the morning, opening your average data report and realizing that your data has been missing for an extended period of time. While we at support are always here for you, and this would be considered a critical case, sometimes the fastest way to take care of an issue like this is to step into action and resolve the problem yourself. By the end of this presentation, I hope to have you armed and ready to fight any causes of communication loss that would be a result in missing data, and show you how to recover your data before it is too late, because that is possible. So one of the biggest questions when going into this will be, well, where do I start? And communication is going to be your first object to tackle. This is the most important subject of all, because you can't recover your data until you resolved your issue with communication. Now I want everyone to take a look, take a moment and remember this slide right here, because it's going to be important. Everyone is going to have a completely different way that your system is set up. But for the sake of simplicity for this presentation, we'll say that your system is set up as so. I would also like to ask that everyone in this presentation gather your information about what you know on your system, and kind of have an idea of how it's typically, how it's going to be set up. You could probably work with your IT to get this information all down. So right here, what we're looking at is from your probes in your stack, you're going to have your umbilicals go down to their respective analyzers. And from your analyzers, depending on how your system is set up, you're going to be having hard wires going directly into the back of the data logger. These hard wires are going to be your analog signals, which will usually be 4 to 20 milliamps, and they're going to be set up to a range that's specific to the probe. You're also going to be having your digital input that are going to be the hardwire ins also. In between your analyzer and your data logger, you could have a DCS or a historian that is kind of a backup just in case our data logger goes out. You're also going to have switches to communicate with parameters that deal with Modbus. And then you're going to have the all great 8864. That's going to be kind of like the middleman in between your analyzer and your server. Also from the data logger, you're of course going to have your Stack Vision server where all your data is going to be stored. Then you will have your DCS, from which you'll be having your hardwire outs from the data logger, such as your digital outputs and your analog outputs, which are going to be the Knox values or whichever parameters you have configured going out to your DCS. So Stack Vision not starting from your client or even the Stack Vision server could be a serious issue. If your server was recently rebooted or down for Windows updates, there could be a possibility that your Stack Vision services did not start back up. This rarely occurs, but it's something to always take into consideration whenever you're doing maintenance on your Windows or the server just has to go down momentarily. So this will be the only problem resolution that I'll give you right off the bat. If your services didn't start back up after rebooting your Stack Vision server, you'll need to go into the Windows Services menu and manually start them. If you're not familiar with doing this, you could possibly just reboot the server. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. A big note of this is that you can't do this from your client, and this must be done from the Stack Vision server itself. So I know a lot of us are working from home right now. If you don't have the ability to remote desktop into the server, you won't be able to restart your services. So it's very vital that you have remote desktop connection to the Stack Vision server itself. Some other signs of data loss is that your reports will be showing lots of purple during the periods that should have been online. This is typically if you know that you were supposed to be online and you see a whole bunch of purple. Also, I want to go back on this slide. If any of you could just let us know how you typically view your data in the morning when you go in or when you're trying to check your data. If you use your average data reports or if you use DataLab or Data Viewer, it'd be really nice, vital information for us if you let us know this. So other signs of data loss is the satellite in the right-hand corner over in the right-hand corner. If you notice that you have a red triangle on the satellite, then that's usually one of the very first signs that we look at, knowing that one of your data loggers have lost communication. So another sign would be going into your controller tools. If you're not familiar with coming to here, it's going to be under your tools and you'll be hitting on controller tools. And typically on this screen, if you're familiar with it, you really want to keep an eye out on the base interval. The base interval is the one that we pay attention to the most. Your average 1 and average 2, those usually get pulled in depending on which interval they're set up for. I believe the average 1 gets pulled in every 15 minutes, and then your average 2 gets pulled in every hour. So the other sign would be the system alarms that were to come in. These are usually followed by the notorious audible and pop-up alarms that we all love seeing. And another one would most likely be for people in the control room that look at these dashboards all day. If you see that your values are expired or not updating, this could be a very big sign that you've lost communication to your data logger. And we're going to be going over this a little bit later, but I figured I'd mention it at the very beginning of the presentation. It's going to be a failed process now sign, which is going to be not the satellite, but the X on the gear on the bottom right-hand corner. And our most favorite is a call at 3 in the morning from a concerned operator. It's funny because I made this presentation a while back, and this last week I received my first call at 3 in the morning, so it's karma for me. Okay, so now we're going to be having an example. This example will be given to help with the understanding of your system. This example will also help you troubleshoot or resolve most common causes of communication loss that we receive here in support. So uh, the way that this example is set up is how we typically get it um, in support. So let's just say 2 weeks from now, it's Monday morning, you're just coming into the office. You were aware that the unit was supposed to be starting up at 100 hours of that day. Depending on how you typically check your data in the morning, which is one of the things that we like to know. So just a reminder. Uh, it could be via emailed average data report, which I highly suggest that you have because it's very useful. It really keeps you from having to log into Stack Vision every morning to check your data. Or you manually generate your average data report, or go into DataLab or Viewer, look at your values. The next thing, you go and check your morning calibrations in CalLab and realize that they didn't show up. This could be viewed in your calibration detail report if you get those instead of going into CalLab every day. So now you're getting worried. Then you start remembering this presentation and see the satellite on the bottom right-hand corner. And remember, this is a communication issue that you have on your hands. Many people will call in thinking that the data logger just didn't run any of the tasks that it was set up to do. And we usually get the short end of the stick on this one. So after that, now you're really starting to remember this presentation and remember how your 8864 works in series with the rest of your hardware. So now we start troubleshooting. This will be the picture that we all remembered. Everyone's going to have a completely different one on how your pieces of hardware are set up. Since your data is currently not coming into the server, you know that that this point of the chain is marked off of our list on our things to check. Now you have to follow and check the origins of where the data is actually supposed to be coming from. If you work on site, this could be as simple as walking out to the SIM shelter and checking to see if your data logger is on. And when going out to the logger, you're going to want to check your raw values, such as your O2 and raw pollutants, to make sure that they're all fluctuating as usual. If your data logger seems to be off after touching the screen, that's not turning on, you may have an emergency that will require an RMA. For this, you're going to need to call support, and depending on the time of day, we could possibly get a logger to you by the next day, but I believe 3 o'clock is the cutoff time from which we can send out another logger after processing this. If you are a technician and you're unfamiliar with the 8864, which most are, the first place you might usually check when your data is missing may be your analyzer. There's nothing wrong with that, but you could possibly just check your data logger and know that your analyzer and your 8864 are bringing in data. If you know that your data is supposed to be receiving all or some values via Modbus and you see B flags on parameters, it's very possible that you could have a Modbus issue on your hands. Unfortunately, troubleshooting Modbus is something that we won't be covering in this course, but we do have a ton of troubleshooting Modbus webinars that are already available uh, on our website. So after this, if you still have questions on Modbus, please feel free to go to the website and take a look at those webinars. They are very informational. So if you check your logger and notice that your data is still coming in just fine, you're going to be stumped and ask, what does this mean? So what this means is that there's a disruption in connection between your data logger and server. So now we're starting to scope in on what really occurs in between your data logger and your Stack Vision. It's as much as we wish that it could be just a simple Ethernet cord from your data logger just to your server, that's usually not the case. So what causes this could be power failures, whether that be from your lightning strikes or your data logger just completely going out. That usually isn't the case, but there's tons of possibilities that could be there. Could be hub or switch failures. We get this one quite a bit, where the 50-year-old hub that the company's been using just gives out one day. Could be hardware failures or physical firewalls that you may have and could probably see, as these are sometimes pretty close to the hub. And then we get into this black hole, which I like to consider as your internal network. We usually have no knowledge of what you typically have set up on your system. This could include blocked ports, MAC address filters, or internal firewalls. It's really whatever your IT chooses. Those are the gurus that we usually end up having to talk to when we have internal network issues. So I included this slide for the sake of your IT in case they ever ask what ports need to be open. Also, for the sake of time, I won't be talking about these, but if you need them, please feel free to refer back to this presentation or just contact us at ESC Support to provide you with the full list. If you do have access to the knowledge article base that we have on our website, you can go and look for this yourself. It's quite a long list. So if your IT would like to know the full list of ports needed, you can definitely find it there. So finding the issue between your server to your logger. If you're unfamiliar with ping, ping is a command prompt command that basically sends a signal out in hopes of seeing a signal come back. To use your ping, you're going to need to open up your command prompt from your Windows menu. Type in ping, then the name of your logger, or the IP address of your data logger. In our case, on the right-hand side, we have a picture that shows failed ping. A big way that to know that you've failed your ping is the big requested timeout, or at the bottom you'll see what says the 100% loss. If it were to pass, you'd have a 0% loss. And just like we can ping the logger from the server, you can ping your server from the logger. As well as ping your server, you can ping your analyzers or other hardware, pieces of hardware that are on your network. And you would do this by going into the logger and using the hotkeys listed below. And you'd be entering the IP address of the server itself. And this will give you the same messages as it did on the ping test. It'll let you know whether you received a 100% loss or 0% loss if passed. So not pinging, one of the first couple things to check out is uh, to see if your Ethernet cord is plugged into the data logger. It may sound ridiculous, but sometimes whenever the technicians are working out, they may tug on an Ethernet cord, or they unplugged it and forgot to plug it in all the way, and may look plugged in, but it's not. Might want to just unplug it and plug it back into, and make sure that you hear the click whenever it plugs in. You're going to want to check all the hardware from the data logger to the server, or at least to the hub, or as far as you can see. And if everything else fails, and everything is plugged in and you seriously don't know what's going on, you can use one of my biggest weapons that's not so secret. Is going to be what Tracert. It's going to be using Tracert. So Tracert is short for trace route. This command, prompt command, that is a command that offers way more details than your typical ping test by listing all of the IP addresses of all the devices that it passes through on its way to its final destination. This information could be a big help to your IT when troubleshooting a communication issue. So this is going to be an example of how Tracert will look in your command prompt. On the left will be a Tracert to google.com, and these are all the pieces of hardware that are in between the server that you're on and Google. On the right, you will be seeing an example of how you would enter a trace route on your server. Since this was done on our internal network, there aren't many stops, but you can see it's the same as using a ping. You'd be typing in Tracert space and then the name of your logger or the IP address of your logger. And this is going to be a failed comparison on your Tracert versus your ping. On the left, you can see that it actually lists all of the destination it reaches before it fails. And on the right, you can see it just fails with the request timed out and 100% loss. So in this case, since it failed at this 205, 251, 244, 238, you'd be providing this to your IT and letting them know. They usually have a lot more resources on knowing what these IP addresses are. And since I'm a visual learner and like knowing how things work visually, kind of set this up for you guys. So this is going to be what it looks like on Tracert and what happens when it fails. Just like the example before, you'd be letting your IT know that you failed at 10.3.4.6. And the rest of the IP addresses that are listed here are not going to be showing up. And we can't let Mario fail, so I made another slide with him making it all the way through. And it lists all of the IP addresses from the start to finish. So you got all your issues resolved. You see on your controller tools that your base is lit up in green, your average one is lit up in green. So now what? Another thing that we get calls in for is your average one being red. And just like I said at the beginning of the presentation, these get pulled in every 15 minutes or 1 hour if it's the average two. So next step is to recover your data. So backpulling and retrieving your data, you'd be going into tools and controller tools. This is very useful if you've temporarily gone through maintenance or the services were down. You can always go in and manually backpull all of your data. Another thing to list is that central only parameters don't have the ability to be backpulled. This is because they're not downloaded to the data logger, and the central only parameters are only calculated on the server via process now. So we'll be going through that shortly. So some of you might be asking, well, what are my central parameters? So if you go into Stack Studio, you can find out which parameters are central only by them showing the none. The parameters that are going to be downloaded to the data logger are, if you can see this SO2 pound hour, it's going to have a data logger and a channel number. This means that it will be a downloaded parameter that is on your data logger. So on this screen, we're showing what controller tools looks like in the case of, just in case some of you've never seen this before. When in controller tools, you will need to select the data logger that you will be backpulling for. This logger will be lit up in blue, as you can see. The rest of the work will be done on the bottom portion of the screen. Here you'll be able to select the start time, the end date, the intervals. This is your 1 minute, 15 minute, 1 hour, or your calibrations, or the calibrations you're trying to receive. After manually retrieving your data, depending on how much data you try to backpull, you'll need to wait a few minutes for the data to pull into the server. So that this isn't an instantaneous thing. We've had a couple customers call in trying to receive a week's worth of 1 minute data. This is a ton of data to try to bring in so suddenly. So if need be, give it 5 minutes, even 30 minutes. It shouldn't take that long, but just give it a little bit of time and the data should pull into the server slowly but surely. It's also important to have your retention times remembered, as once the retention times have passed, you can no longer backpull from the logger. And you must find your data from an outside source. So this will be going to the historian or DCS that may be in between your analyzer and your data logger. So here we're going to have a look at what it looks like in Stack Studio again, and this is going to be under your channel settings. Your retention times in Stack Studio will be called your storage controller time intervals, which will be on the lower half of the screen under the interval settings. Typically, if you purchase the logger swap and reconciliation for your plant, we've done our best to have your storage controller time increase to the following standard just for the just in case situations. In the 8864, we're currently able to have 90 days worth of 1 minute data, 90 days of 15-minute data, and an entire year of hourly data. This wasn't possible in the 8832. So if for some reason, I don't think anyone should be, but if for some reason you're still running an 8832, it's very important to check your retention times because sometimes you'll have 1 hour worth of data being held in the data logger. Then after that hour, you can no longer backpull. As for your calibrations, in the 8864, we can hold 120 days, or I shouldn't say 128 days, but 120 records worth of calibration records. And I must make note that it's extremely important to verify what is configured directly in your 8864 itself. As if these changes weren't downloaded to the data logger, they'll stay what is previously configured. This means that if in Stack Studio, if no matter if you have your storage controller time interval set to 90 days, if it's not reflected in the data logger, and in the data logger you have it set for 1 hour, then your data is only going to be held for an hour, not the 90 days that you configured in Stack Studio. So this is going to be kind of a screen showing you the hotkeys in case you want to refer back to this presentation. I kind of missed a step in the channels. After you select your parameters, there's going to be some parameters that show it right off the bat. If not, you might have to hit Control N, which is to go to the next page and look at the interval settings as such. And this is the other step on how to look at your calibration records stored per calibration. So now we're going to be running through how to perform the procedure of backpulling your data. So to backpull your data, as previously stated, if you usually view your data through average data report, you're going to want to select your unit and missing parameters. So that'll be this Knox pound hour, Knox high, Knox low, O2 unit op hour. And you're going to want to look at the hour, the first hour that you start missing your data that should have been online. You can usually only look at one parameter, as if you lost communication, it'll be across the board. So you don't necessarily have to look at all these parameters. So after you find out what's your first hour of missing data, you're gonna want to go into Stack Vision, go to your DataLab, and type in your starting and end date, which would usually be to current time, and go to the interval, to your 1 minute interval, and bring up all the data as such. And you can see right here, it's across the board. So you're going to want to take note of that first minute. Just jot that down. And then you're going to want to go to the final minute that your data is missing. So in this case, it's going to be 11:04 at 10:59. After you take note of that, in Stack Vision, you're going to have to go to Tools, Controller Tools. If you ever forget this, you can refer back to the presentation, and input the start date and end times and end date for the time that you're missing data. And you know, now that we're able to hold 90 days worth of data, you might as well pull in all the data that's needed. So I would usually start off at 1 minute, go up to 15 minutes, and 1 hour, and so on and so forth. And then even if your calibrations are in, I would still backpull those just in case. Just something I've grown accustomed to. So we're going to be covering a little bit of process now when it comes to your data. This example, okay. So what is process now? So process now, your process now sequences will be a list of tasks that are dependent from one another. Within each sequence, you're going to have quite a few number of tasks that work in series from the previous task. These sequences will take care of your processing, your accumulation, your missing data substitution, and your rolling averages. Everyone will have a completely different task from one another. The sequences may even be different per unit. So no one that's here attending is going to have the exact same set of process now tasks as one another. So running through the process now failure symptoms, you'll have a red X on the bottom right hand corner, and if you look at your process now history report, you'll notice that it'll be failed. All right. So some of the other process now failures for your data is going to be missing downstream calculated parameters. These may be your reported parameters, such as your Knox pound hour, Knox C. You're also going to be missing your extended averages, such as your rolling 1 month average or 30-day average. But you'll notice that your raw channels are in. If your system is set up to not recalculate the parameters at the server level, then this won't be a problem for you. But there are quite a few people out there that even though the Knox pound hour would typically be set up on your data logger, if it's recalculated on the server level, then even though you had these values before, they may go missing. So some of you may call in saying that the data was there before and now it's gone. This could be the cause. So what causes invalid data? Which causes the non-calculation of all your parameters downstream. So some of these could be, most of you may already know this, your regulatory requirements. This is your failed calibrations or your percent-based validation for part 60 or quadrant validation for your part 75. And this mouse pad right here, we usually give them out at the user groups. If you don't have one, just feel free to send me an email or say in the chat that you want one and we can see about getting one sent out. It's very useful. Right here you can see the validation flags that causes your data to be invalid. Even though I've been here for quite a few years now, I'll still go back and look at all these flags that would cause validation issues. So I use it quite oftenly. Your calibration report flags won't usually be on your data, but they'll be in the data logger, and I believe they show up in the DataLab if you pull up your flags. The use of polling alarms. So polling alarms, you can configure H flags to invalidate by using a mask. This is configured in polling alarms. The use of condition manager. This is the ghost sometimes that will mark your data invalid if you have a condition manager, and it's set up in your process now tasks as one of your process now tasks in one of your sequences. Your flag validation defaults could also mark your data invalid, and you can pretty much do anything here. We can configure the big H flag to say that you're in maintenance, that your data is missing and invalid, or anything else. So that these are some of the causes of invalid data. So some of you may be asking, well, what about my invalid data? This has nothing to do with calculating. But so as we discussed throughout this presentation, everything pretty much works in series from one another. So if for some reason you failed your O2 calibration this morning and your process now is configured to calculate everything downstream from Knox ppm, this is using the -C on your process now task, then everything downstream from Knox ppm will be missing. So your raw data may be coming in perfectly fine and the merge channels working perfectly fine, but since you failed your O2, your Knox pound mm and your Knox pound hour won't be coming in. And the same will apply for heat in, since you're using heat in your Knox pound hour equation, and heat in is invalid, Knox pound hour and everything else downstream from that will be invalid. So you'll notice this by if you have your Knox pound mm, but not your Knox pound hour. So here's an example of a daily process now sequence. As you see, the number of tasks is quite lengthy, and it will vary from site to site. So not everyone's always going to have this long of a process now sequence. One of the biggest things you need to know about process now and how it works is that it works from top to bottom. If I can ask if everyone take a mental picture of this sequence. So since process now works from the top bottom, if the sequence fails at number 3, all the other tasks will be aborted and will be reported as failed or error on your process now history report. To see what step your process now failed on, you can hit the plus arrow, which would be this guy right here, and it'll show you that you failed on the fuel analysis step. And since we had a presentation like this exactly, which is most recent from our user group 19 this fall in Austin, we can go another hour on troubleshooting process now errors, but if you would like to find it, it should be in our resources on our website.